All right. Folks can hear me? Like just a thumbs up from the supervisor or from perfect. All right. Thanks, everybody. We're going to get this started. Today, we're going to be talking about New York State land banks and the potential for one in Columbia County, what that could look like. We will also hear from Adam Zaranko, who is the executive director of the Albany County Land Bank Corporation. And Adam is also the president of the New York Land Bank Association, which is the member association of the 28 now land banks currently operating throughout New York State. We will also hear from Gina Paradis. Gina has been the executive director of the Chautauqua County Land Bank for the past 9 years or so. Chautauqua is one of our longest standing rural county level land banks. So we'll hear from Gina about the unique or specific challenges and opportunities presented by land banking in rural areas and some of the successes they've had out there. And then you'll have to hear from me, and I will talk about the need for land banking or how land banking can be a really powerful tool throughout Columbia County, and what that might look like, some potential avenues we could go down should we adopt a land bank. So I'm going to turn it over to Adam. Adam's going to give us a higher level view of land banking, kind of the history of it throughout New York State, how they've developed over time. There have been some really interesting changes in land banking, especially in regards to how they've responded to the affordable housing issues we've had, certainly since COVID. Many of the land banks, most of the land banks were started to combat vacancy, tax delinquency, blight, things that you saw immediately after the 2008 housing foreclosure crisis. Since that time, a lot of the land banks have pivoted to start addressing affordable housing issues. And most recently, Governor Kathy Hochul actually basically informed land banks that they need to start working with their community partners to address our affordable housing challenges. So with that as an overview, I will turn it over to Adam.
Thanks, Chris.
Oh, sorry, Adam. I do want to say one thing. If you have questions, please put them in chat. I'll collect those, and after our presentations, we'll have an open conversation relating to any of the questions that come up in chat. Okay.
Right on. Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Thanks for providing the opportunity to talk about land banks. So like Chris said, I'm Adam Zaranko. I'm both the president of the New York Land Bank Association, and I'm the director of the Albany County Land Bank. And so we're one of the larger land banks in the state. But as you'll see, land banks come in all different shapes and sizes. And at the Land Bank Association, we really just share information and help answer questions and provide information as it relates to people, in groups considering starting a land bank. So this is a great forum to be part of. Just a quick baselining. This is my super simple slide of, what is a land bank? We get a lot of different definitions depending who you ask. We're not a bank as in traditional financial institution sense. We're not a land trust, although we do work with both of those organizations. We are special not-for-profit corporations that set up under New York State law that's enabled to collaborate with community members and all different types of stakeholders and do things that government can't necessarily do on their own or don't do well, and things that the real estate market are unlikely to do or may not be able to do, kind of sit in the middle of those things. And we do it with the statutory authority provided by state law to land banks in New York State, but also by collaborating with partners. And I'll show you a little next slide about all the different types of stakeholders we work with. But it's all centered around reclaiming vacant and abandoned properties. And like Chris said, we are part of the newest wave of land banks to emerge in communities across the country that came out of the 2008 foreclosure crisis, where we've been being reactive to catch up to those things. But as we kind of got both feet on the ground here in New York State and more broadly as a national practice, we've been looking forward to being part of the solution to the affordable housing crisis, which touches many of the same communities that have vacant and abandoned properties, but not only, right? So this is the slide that I use for our land bank, but this is a representation of who we work with. And land banks, through our statutory authority, the powers provided to us under state law, and real estate site control that we're capable of bringing to the equation, we can work, and we do work with any and all of these groups. Usually the best projects have as many of these gray bubbles in them as possible. We really do work together to collaborate and create outcomes that others can't or won't do. And, we could talk separately, but there's, upwards of nearly 1,000 examples here in Albany County when we're approaching our 1,000th sale soon, of ways that we do that a little bit more deliberately with the way we dispose of real property. This is a slide that provides a little bit of a snapshot of what land banks can do. I also added some information about what land banks can do and what they can't do, because we can do a lot of things under the state statute, but there's certain things we can't do. Really anything around real property that any private owner could do, the land bank authorities are able to do. Develop, assemble, maintain, dispose, construction, demolition, lease, all those things. We're tax exempt from all taxation. Our operations and property are exempt from all taxation under the New York State law. So we do use that to help assemble sites and come up with better outcomes. And we've often found that the first outcome for a piece of property isn't necessarily always the best outcome. And so land banks are able to kind of acquire properties, think about the outcome, work with partners, and use that property to create outcomes that just aren't happening. And I have a couple examples of that at the end. There's a lot of things we can do, but there's many things we can't do. We're not able to do anything that circumvents other zoning laws or rules or regulations. We can't do code enforcement. We're not code enforcement agents. We're not empowered to do those types of functions. But we do, I will say, we do have our most successful outcomes when we collaborate. We work here in Albany County. We work with 19 different municipalities. We have rural communities in our hill towns all the way to the state capitol, and a cross section of everything in between. Many of our communities have come to work with the land bank, even if it's in a suburban area that's experiencing building pressures. We've done land conservation projects together and things to help preserve green space. And in the cities and other areas, we're working to do a little bit more affordable housing work where we have more property. The New York's land bank program was established in 2011 under state law, and it really started to take off in 2012. Initially, land banks, they were able to create 10 under the state statute. That was a cap. And a lot of that was because they were new entities that can be very powerful and effective. And there was some hesitation around how the program would grow, what the uptake would be, what the demand for our work would be. As you can see, the concept yielded very quickly that these are proven, just like in other communities across the country, these are proven community development and economic development tools, depending on how you wield them. And the first 10 were established. Then the cap was increased to allow 20. Those were quickly established, especially over 2015 and 2016. Then the cap was increased to 25. Those were established over the next 2 years. And now the current cap is 35. And most recently, two of our our North Country counties established land banks this year, Franklin County and Essex County. The current cap is 35, so there's still some slots available. And foreclosing governmental units, as I'm sure Chris will talk about later, have to apply to establish land banks. And those are the entities that do the tax foreclosures. That's part of the state statute. So this map on the left's a little outdated because it doesn't capture Clinton County and Essex County, but it gives you a sense of where the land banks in our service areas are located. Accounting for New York City as an outlier population, about 70% of our state's population, more now with the North Country land banks coming online, is served by a land bank. Most land banks are either county-wide or city-wide, and again, that's based on the foreclosing governmental unit, the entity that creates the land bank. It does the foreclosure. So, Albany County does the foreclosures for all of our municipalities. So they established a county-wide land bank, which I can say quite reassuredly has a lot of utility, because we do work in it. We've worked in every single community, all 19, and we've done real estate dispositions in all of them. We do work everywhere where we're needed. Smaller land banks are city size, like Newburgh and Troy. And then land banks can work together through intra-governmental agreements, like the Greater Mohawk Valley Land Bank is the largest land bank by area served. That's Rome, Utica, and like 3 or 4 counties. That's a very big land bank. But most are countywide, and the majority of our land banks serve predominantly rural communities. I think often that's not as widely known. You often see the vacant buildings in the cities and upstate as kind of the pictures of quote unquote blighted buildings and things like that. But most of the work being done by land banks is in predominantly rural communities, including, you know, the majority of the area of Albany County is actually rural in typology. So, and then the others is we just celebrated our 10 years of being a program here in the state. So I have to put our humble brag slide in. We quickly became one of the most sophisticated and active networks of land banks in the US. And I say that because we're backed up by the numbers and because our government invested in us, right? Initially, we got New York State bank settlement funds from the Attorney General's office who held large banks located in Wall Street responsible for financial misconduct leading up to the 2008 foreclosure crisis. A portion of that was used to seed land banks and really gave us a boost. And more recently, we've been in the last 2 state budgets receiving appropriations specifically to fund the work of New York State land banks, which is a first for our state, and just goes to show that our policymakers and elected officials across the board are really investing in tools that work like land banks, and we're returning multiples on that investment. And the slide right here shows that. The 10-year report, by the way, Chris, you can circulate it later if you want. It's on our website, and it's a really good, it has a snapshot of every single land bank's key projects, and you can kind of really learn as much as you want about what's been going on over the past 10 years. So I'll finish up with this to keep it high level. In New York State, over the past 10 years, as the program's expanded, land banks have really been stretching and expanding to do the type of work that's needed in that community or those communities that they serve based on collaborating with their local governments and the stakeholders. And it's centered around a couple different approaches is the way I kind of think it through. You know, building better neighborhoods, increasing affordable housing has emerged as a top on everyone's list, obviously. And then some land banks actually focus primarily on reclaiming contaminated sites like brownfields. And we're even doing some work to support workforce development goals. Actually, last week here in Albany, we announced a partnership with a group called Youth Build, which provides construction skills training to underserved or underrepresented youth. And they're getting out of the classroom and helping build a prototype new construction affordable house model that we're working on. And hopefully we're thinking that those will create opportunities for future jobs for people that now have those skills. So you start to kind of connect those dots. And here in Albany, our board has been very focused on closing the economic and racial home ownership and gaps that have been in our cities, predominantly Albany, from the practice of redlining, which definitely impacts a lot of upstate legacy cities. So, you know, traditional land banking, sometimes the buildings can't be saved and they have to be demolished. And I'm sure many folks on this call are familiar. That is a tedious and expensive process. There are grant funds from the state to help do that now. You have to be cognizant of the asbestos and where you do with the debris and the insurance and liability. But sometimes buildings cannot be saved. And if you leave them to deteriorate, they continue to harm both the direct and indirect economic and social negative externalities they create. So it's just better to invest in getting rid of the building, and land banks do that. I think Syracuse is probably the best example. They've done over like 500 demolitions of vacant buildings since they were established. Here in Albany, we've done over 100. And I'm sure Gina might talk about some of their work, but sometimes you just get rid of that one building in the middle of your town that no one's been able to solve for. And just that demo alone could have a really big transformative impact. And we see that in a lot of our rural communities where it's not the number, but it's the property that you address. And that's key, I think, when you're tailoring your land bank. You know, we've done community gardens and things like that. Affordable housing is top of mind for everyone. Many land banks do best with partners, 1 or more partners. 15 of New York's land banks have different partnerships with Habitat for Humanity. Here in Albany, in the capital region, we have a very strong partnership where we help get them real estate and vacant buildings and bring them in, and we kind of either match grant funding or they do the homes and do the site we do the site assemblages. And this is just a snapshot of some of the rehabs we've done, but we're focusing now on new construction. And if you talk to any Habitat director, not having to struggle with acquiring and assembling all the sites really gives a boost to the rest of their program. And many land banks are doing that across the state to get new affordable housing built. We work with land trusts. If people don't know, land trusts basically are like not-for-profit or community development organizations that hold property. They own the land and they hold it in permanent affordability. So the family could own the home on the land, but the price has to stay affordable. Although it can appreciate, it can't kind of skyrocket as surrounding property values take off and get out of reach. What we've done is partner with our land trusts and others across the state are to help, again, get them real estate, not just auction off real estate, but really get it to them through our process. And they usually have the grant funding our land trust to rehab the building, and then they will get it to a family that couldn't afford a home. And over time, we're creating pockets of affordability through transforming vacant properties and getting them to the land trust, which already exists here. And just about every land bank works with housing developers now. Like I said, without the real estate, it's hard to do real estate development, especially affordable housing, which also requires the funding. Land banks bring site control into the mix, and that's sometimes what you need to unlock the rest of the formula, just to save having to go out and get the sites or piece them together or do the pre-development work. Brownfields, I won't spend too much time on this, but this is another vein you can explore if this is a challenge in your communities. Suffolk County Land Bank on Long Island's done a lot of work, but they started reclaiming brownfield properties that owners just sat on and weren't paying the taxes, but they weren't fearful of the government foreclosing on their property. So they just sat there waiting to cash out maybe one day until the land bank started focusing on it and acquired a couple brownfields through tax foreclosure. And all of a sudden they got a windfall, back taxes, penalties, and interest owed right away. So just the ability to get to these sites sometimes is all you need to get people off the fence. And more land banks are working with Department of Environmental Conservation to formalize like hold harmless agreements. If you are helping reclaim a property that is known or perceived to be contaminated, a lot of people are scared to even touch it or look at it, so they just sit there. Land banks have been working with the state to kind of get indemnified, so it's not fully, but within reason, for any incidental contamination to be held harmless, and to then figure out ways to work with partners to get those sites reclaimed or redeveloped, which has been growing as a practice because I think every community pretty much has brownfield haunting it somewhere in the state. Talk a little bit about this, but if you have vocational schools, pre-apprentice programs for different union pipelines or skill building or like community colleges and you name it, if they are learning in the classroom or learning skills, we found it's a great opportunity to get folks into the neighborhoods, onto the buildings to help rehab them where they're really working on being part of rebuilding and restoring and learning those skills that you can't really learn in the classroom. You have to put your hands on the work sometimes. And then again, here in Albany, this is primarily also in upstate cities that have been significantly harmed by redlining, and there was a lot of conversation about that over the past couple of years as more folks have acknowledged that. We've been working to do things to help close those gaps, mainly around just creating access to pathways to home ownership through rehabbing vacant buildings and getting partners that have funding to get mortgages and capital to buyers who have been denied access to buying homes or building wealth. And just by putting those things together, we've been able to unlock some opportunities for people to buy homes that just it wasn't available to them otherwise. And just one way land banks can help to kind of put the pieces together. And we can come back to this because I'm sure the top of mind question is also, well, who pays for all those cool projects and things that you guys talk about? There has been an overwhelming amount of support vis-a-vis state budget over the past 2 years. I think it's up to $60 million have been appropriated just to land banks over 2 budget cycles through New York State Homes and Community Renewal, through their land bank initiative. That's definitely our most direct funding we've gotten since the bank settlement funds. But we also work with getting access to all these other funding sources. ARPA funds is a big one, which every community received in some level, and a lot of communities are putting those towards their land banks or projects the land banks are participating in. The state has all types of grant programs out there, which I'm sure Chris is very familiar with in his work. The last one I want to point out, though, is the co-development and or public-private partnership models. What we've seen to be very successful is land banks partnering with either private developers who can't do what land banks do, but need the real estate, and therefore are willing to do things a little bit more that benefit the neighborhood than they would if they had to do it all by themselves. And also on the community development side with nonprofit housing development agencies, which we talked about, like Habitat. But again, there really is like not just one market we serve. We work with landlords, we work with home buyers, and partnerships, whether it's partnering with big or little private developers or public or not-for-profit developers or community development orgs. That's been a very powerful piece of what land banks have been exploring across the state, and something I definitely want to point out to you all, because there's a lot of room for growth there, and we're seeing it kind of take off and be met with a good response from other developers as well. And so, Chris, that's pretty much my top line, and I'll stick around for questions if that's cool, and turn it over to Gina.
Hi, everybody. My name's Gina Paradis. I'm the executive director of the Chautauqua County Land Bank, one of the first, or I guess I am the first rural land bank that was established in the state. So I'm just going to share with you a little bit about how our land bank works and kind of where our priorities have been, and hopefully that will help inform your moving forward as well. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, great. So just in case you're not familiar with Chautauqua County, we're here in the most southern west part of the state, about 9 hours from downstate, and just an hour south of Buffalo. We have a fairly large footprint in the southwestern corner of the state. We cover about 1,500 square miles, but our population is about 127,000 and change, which is down a little more than 5% from the last census. So we're still following that, unfortunate out-migration of people from our county. We have a median income around 50,000. Our median home values are much lower than what you're used to at about 96,000. And our poverty rates are right around 18,000 for the county, or I'm sorry, about 18% for the county. But when you get to our two cities, which is here north on Lake Erie, we have the city of Dunkirk, and then just south of Chautauqua Lake is Jamestown. So we have two cities that are entitlement communities in our county, and the poverty rates in those two cities hover around 28%. We have 42 municipalities that I work with, and I do cover all the municipalities, city and rural. However, I would say probably 80% to 85% of my work is done in the two cities, since they have the largest need.
Hey, Gina, sorry. Can you, would you be able to put this in the slideshow view just for on the screens on Zoom? It's just to load up a little bit.
Yep, sorry about that. Let me I gotta move things around a little bit here. Oops, nope, you don't want that one. Sorry. There you go.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
So, and again, our land bank was established in 2012. It was founded by the director of planning for the county and his partner, who was a nonprofit director of a downtown revitalization organization in Jamestown. They had the providence of meeting Frank Alexander, who was the author of the Land Bank Act for the state. They met him at a conference when they were considering land banking, and found out that that the state was going to be authoring some legislation. So they were able to put together a volunteer board of directors and start working with the Center for Community Progress on a business plan and get in an early application to become the third land bank established in the state. We do cover countywide, as I mentioned. We do work with the county legislator. We are not a 5 and 50 land bank. We do actually acquire our targeted properties for $1 through the legislature. And we do that with a very strategically directed acquisition process, I'm sorry, can't talk today, that we work with both the legislature and with our local municipalities to target those acquisitions. And then we pull them the night before the auction because people do have the ability to reacquire their properties right up until the day before the auction. So it's kind of those right at midnight kind of things when we actually find out what our properties are going to be. But it probably takes us 4 to 5 months worth of work researching so that we can make sure that that process is strategic. We usually average about 15 rehabs that we pull from the auction per year and about 24 demos that we acquire every year. This slide just gives you kind of a feel for how our programming funds are allocated. I spend a lot of money on demolitions every year. Beyond that, we have our sales for rehab program and then our vacant lot program. We really look at stabilizing our transitional neighborhoods. That's kind of our first priority, to protect the neighborhoods, stabilize them, bring up those properties that could push that tipping point to the wrong end in a neighborhood, so that we can stabilize it and bring distressed properties back up to standard. And then we also look at our distressed neighborhoods as far as making them safer, and removing the blight that discourages reinvestment in the neighborhoods. We have a very, as I mentioned before, strategic focus on how we do our acquisition and disposition, which I'll get into in a moment. As Adam said, collaboration is key to our effectiveness. We partner with both our local affordable home agencies and organizations such as Habitat to develop the affordable housing opportunities. And we also work very, very closely with our local municipalities to both identify problem properties and identify opportunities where we can build home ownership opportunities. We also align with municipal and state programs to heighten our first-time home buyer incentives. Our acquisition strategy, again, relies primarily on county tax foreclosures. We can also get donations both from banks, from private individuals, but we look very closely at those donation opportunities to make sure that they are aligned with our mission and our strategic approach in a community. And also there is money now for acquiring private property. We haven't done that a whole lot, although we have used grant funding to acquire bank foreclosures sometimes when they are in strategic locations for us. Again, we usually average about 15 rehabs a year, about 25 demos per year, and we take title to all of those through the foreclosure process. When I talk about our strategic focus on how we acquire things, we really sit down with all the municipal leaders through a variety of means, making sure that even the small municipalities are aware of opportunities that might reveal themselves in the foreclosure process, to understand their problem properties. Sometimes they have derelict properties that have sat for years and years. that they have not had the money to demolish themselves, or they haven't been able to take site control. So we will work with them to understand what the resources are, how we can help. And one thing that we found that the rural municipalities have really appreciated is the fact that not only will we pass through funding to do a demolition, we've actually taken on the project management of all of the rural demolitions. And actually, this year we will start doing the city demolition project management as well. So that really helped them, because whereas we went into it thinking they just didn't have the money to do demolitions, what we found is they lacked the money and the wherewithal from a human resource standpoint and a skill standpoint to actually make those demolitions happen. So that was kind of a key learning that we had early in our years. We do work with the municipalities to identify those problem properties, derelict properties, but we also work with our economic development people in the county and in the cities to identify parcels that are key for strategic assemblage for either economic development purposes or for redevelopment for housing initiatives. From a disposition standpoint, part of our disposition policy really looks at how we dispose of our properties in a responsible way and how we identify that. With regards to our sales for rehab program, we don't do a ton of renovation ourselves. We found that that's been difficult from the standpoint of finding contractors in a very tight market in terms of labor force. But we do find plenty of people who have the wherewithal to do the renovations themselves and or have construction partners that they're able to work with. So how we set up our program is that when we get a potential rehab for sale, we will go in, we'll clean it out, have it assessed, write a minimum scope of work for that property, have an appraisal done, and then we'll set the price for that rehab below market value, usually at 40 to 60% of the appraised value, which gives investors the room to reinvest in the property and in the renovation. And then the prospective purchasers will submit a proposal that includes their renovation plan, their renovation budget, what their experience is doing that kind of thing, their timeline, et cetera, so that our board can really look at the prospective purchasers and choose the one for that property that they feel is going to have the best outcome. And then those purchasers are held by contract to doing what they promise. We have a covenant on the deed, as well as a performance escrow that they have to submit to us that is returned at the end of the demolition. So that kind of helps us hold their feet to the fire, make sure that the proposals we get are forthright and honest in terms of their plan and their performance. With regards to demolition, again, those are primarily identified by the municipal partner in cooperation with the code enforcement officers. I really work hard to build really good relationships across code enforcement in the county and work very closely with our municipal leaders to make sure that we know what their problem properties are and what their priorities are for acquisition and demolition. Side lots and vacant lots, primarily those are resulting from demolition, but we are able to acquire some of those through tax foreclosure as well. And we usually look at those based on highest and best use. And then we will either market them to an adjacent neighbor or a development partner or an organizational or community development partner, depending on what the highest and best use of that lot is. With regards to affordable homeownership, we use several programs to incentivize homeownership and try to support first-time homeowners. Our sales for rehab program, again, we sell them below market value. We do have the ability, depending on grant funding, to subsidize the rehabs. And we work with municipal partners to put together a program that allows for healthy housing rebates, where we can provide reimbursable subsidies for anything that has to do with healthy housing, which would be mold, asbestos, lead mitigation. What we found is some of the programs that are out there via the state or federal are a little bit too restrictive for all of our homeowners to take advantage of. You know, from our standpoint, the best time to remove lead from a home is when it's not occupied. But the typical lead program doesn't allow for that. They want there to be a family in the home with children under the age of 7 or 6, you know, in order to get the loan or the grant. So we've worked with our community foundation locally to put together a rebate program that loosens a lot of those restrictions in how we apply the funding. We still do look at income qualifications, but we can loosen the restrictions around a lot of our funding, a lot of our grant funding when we are working with local foundations rather than state or federal agencies. Our rehab loan fund, we created a couple of years ago. We worked with Home Headquarters out of Syracuse. That is it's a nonprofit that worked primarily with the city of Syracuse Land Bank, but has now expanded. I think they're working with Albany, Buffalo, and Chautauqua County so far to create these loans that can be used for both acquisition and rehab. We seeded the fund with some grant funding, and then they multiplied that by 5 or 6 times in order to create a loan fund for us to utilize for this purpose. And that loan fund can include a subsidy. So if I have grant funds that I can put against a house to kind of shrink that appraisal gap to make the loan work, then I can do that with Home Headquarters. And that has really opened up access to our programs a ton, because before that, our Sales for Rehab program really required closing on a cash basis because most of the land bank homes are not mortgageable. And that really restricted who could buy our homes. People that either had a ready line of credit or ready cash. And by creating the rehab loan fund, it's really grown the accessibility of our program. Again, our habitat partnership, we have a small habitat in the county. We work with, we are helping them do 1 to 2 homes per year. Primarily through demolition and offering a buildable parcel to them, and working with them in building their volunteer base. Municipal program partnerships also are a key way that we have been affecting affordable home ownership. We work with primarily the city of Jamestown, but we're also starting to work with the city of Dunkirk on using the Article 19A and B, which allows municipalities to do an expedited foreclosure on vacant and abandoned real estate in their communities. And we're working with the city of Jamestown on rolling that out, doing some basically property management holding for them, and then assisting with their disposition of those properties in a first-time home buyer situation. And then lastly, our Hands-on Neighborhoods program. We are building a first-time home buyer mentoring program, and we're working very closely with Habitat on that as well, since they already had a really good mentoring type situation with their clients. So we're rolling that out to our first-time home buyers and making that available on a one-year basis from the time they get accepted by the bank for a loan, right through their first year of home ownership. Oops, sorry. And here's just an example of one of our rehab. This was one of our first rehab for sale properties. It was an eyesore in a nice neighborhood in the village of Fredonia, which has a SUNY school. Before we took it on, its appraised value was $17,000 in a neighborhood where appraisals were running probably around 125 as an average. By the time it was finished, it was appraised for $185,000, and it was sold very quickly by the investor that put that together and did that renovation. Some other examples of some of our before and afters. This first one is a rental that was condemned, had no water, had a lot of illicit activity in it before and after, and it went back on the market as an affordable rental, quality rental in the city of Jamestown. This next one in the middle is an abandoned home in the city of Dunkirk that was taken on by one of our investors that we like working with. She rehabbed the whole home, really brought it back to more of its original character, did a beautiful job, and sold it to a first-time homeowner with our help when she was finished. On the upper right is one of our affordable housing partnerships that we did with CRIC, which is the Chautauqua Home Improvement and Rehab Corporation. And they got a home through us, through the tax foreclosure, and a pass-through with us, and renovated it for a first-time homeowner. And the bottom photo is one of the new property developments that Stell did based on some of the parcels we were able to demolish and put into their program. And that was a very comprehensive program for affordable housing that they developed with a lot of different grant funding all pieced together. So that's all I had to share with you. I'll kick it back over to Chris, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, thank you. I have a lot of questions if no one else does, but we'll get to those. I'm going to run through mine pretty quickly. We don't have the successes that Adam and Gina have had because we haven't got a land bank quite yet. But we'll talk about what we talk about when we talk about workforce housing, what we talk about when we talk about affordable housing. Whatever you want to call these terms, at the end of the day, we're really talking about, we're really talking about trying to create housing opportunities for the people who work in the county or, live in the county, but would like to step up from a rental to a homeownership situation. This is really who we're talking about. So here at CEDC, we've taken on the task of hosting the Housing Task Force. My position was created. The County Board of Supervisors has asked us to create this informational presentation. And really what we're focusing on is, yes, affordable housing is an issue, but workforce development is also, you've heard Adam and Gina both refer to workforce development. These two things overlap, right? We need to have housing for the folks that we need to have working here in order to keep our county running. So that's my little preamble. So we'll get into this. All right, I'm going to throw some data at you. Can everybody see this? Because I can't see your faces anymore. How about now?
Now we can see it.
Perfect. Okay, I'm going to throw some data at you. I'm a data nerd. This is really, painting the picture of the portrait of need throughout the county. One sec, my PowerPoint is giving me a hard time. Okay, here we go. So here's single family sales data. Some of this information was collected for us by the Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress, who created the Columbia County Housing Brief, which really was the driving document behind a lot of the actions the Board of Supervisors has taken in the past couple of years. If you look, this is broken up into 2018 to 2022 and also 20 to 22, which it shows you, a bit of the effect of the pandemic. The real important numbers to me, if you look at ending inventory in 2022, which is right kind of smack dab in the middle here, there were 269 homes available for purchase throughout the county, full stop, at all price points. At the end of 2018, it was almost 3 times as many at 726. If you look at just the dollar change in sales, the sale prices of homes, a $166,000 increase from 2018 to 22, and it's increased 83,000 since 2020. So in the past 5 years, 4 years for which we have data, that is a 69.5% increase in single family home sales. In the same amount of time, so this is a lot of information. This is all of the labor categories that New York State Department of Labor collects and publishes. And this gives you the average wage for each of these industries. So if you look at some of the areas where most of our residents are employed, which is retail trade, healthcare and social assistance, public administration, you see average wages in 2020 were 34,000 and change, 46.5, and 54. I can tell you that since this was published, the most recent data for which we've got, and this comes out quarterly from the state, there's been a 2.5% increase in the average wages across all sectors. So it went from 45,988 to 49,164. So in a time when single family home sales increased 69.5%, our workers' wages increased 2.5%. If you look at kind of our neighbors, I just pulled this from the National Association of Realtors. These are the current monthly mortgage payments for average homes. They do a mean calculation on these. So currently in this year, 1,488 is the average monthly mortgage payment. Last year it was $935. This is just mortgage, doesn't include all the other bells and whistles that come with owning a home. So we're right in line with the increases that the rest of the neighboring counties have seen, but it's not great company, right? These increases are pretty significant. Much of this has to do with mortgage rates, which again, that absolutely impacts affordable housing or just housing affordability in general. Adam touched on this a little bit, but again, I'm a numbers guy, so when we talk about rural counties, really, what are we talking about? The state's definition is if the county is below 200,000 in population, then that counts as rural. One of these counties, Livingston County Land Bank, very interesting land bank, happens to be almost the exact same size and population as Columbia County. They have about 200 more people than us, and their square mileage, I think, is maybe a half mile less than ours. But you can see there's a wide variety of what rural land banks are, right? Chautauqua is a pretty good sized county. It has 42 municipalities in it. And then you get as smaller as Essex County, which is one of the newer ones, or even smaller, the Finger Lakes. So these are really small rural counties that are still doing tremendous work with their vacancy issues and also with a pivot to housing issues and housing accessibility. Really briefly, and Gina, I believe Chautauqua works pretty similarly to Essex's proposed process of collecting inventory. They have a land bank staff that is actually a little bit of a passed over staff from an existing nonprofit. So Essex County is housing their land bank within a nonprofit that has been doing housing work for decades. So their staff will work with their county board of supervisors when the foreclosure list comes out. They'll take a look at which properties might make some sense to be transferred into the land bank, but then they go to those town supervisors, ask those town supervisors to review this list with their board with their town board. And if they do agree that this is a property that should be transferred into the land bank, it gets kicked back up to the county supervisor or county board of supervisors, who will then vote whether or not to transfer the property, the parcel, into the land bank. They do that, and I think, Gina, this is the same thing in Chautauqua County. They actually pull that from the foreclosure list, and then they figure out, they negotiate whatever the terms of that sale will be, but it's outside of the normal auction process, which basically based on consensus between the county board of supervisors and the town board. Now, I told you that was going to be really quick because I have a lot of questions, and I hope other people do too. If anybody else has questions, we'll do those first. Gina, there's a question for you specifically. One of my housing task force members would like to know, what is a favored investor or a favorite investor?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and it probably wasn't the best choice of words, but what I was referring to is we have some investors who have purchased our sales for rehab homes more than once, and they're certainly our favorite if they do a really good job, stick to what they promise they're going to do, and make sure that the end use goes either to a first-time homeowner or becomes a quality rental, since we have so many substandard rentals in our county.
Chris, we also have, like, the way our land bank disposition policy is set up is, to Gina's point, if someone purchases a property and successfully completes their obligation, our board can look favorably upon that for the next application, even if it's a homeowner who got a home and then they're going to do investment, and vice versa for subpar work, right? So we make sure properties are rehabbed to code, but that doesn't necessarily always mean that they're good quality work, even though they're safe and livable. So land banks have that flexibility in their policies to add, extra weight to good rehabs, because you want to build quality housing, not just housing. And that breaks some of the cycle that we saw in auctions, where the same bad actor could come back over and over again and get properties with little to no consequences. So we may get into it, but our disposition policy is on our website. We have a whole litany of criteria where if you are proven to be a poor steward of real property vis-a-vis code violations, foreclosures, repeat foreclosures, failure to deliver on your project obligations, you're not rewarded with a property through our disposition process. We try to break those cycles that auctions tend to incentivize in some cases. So it's kind of like, I wouldn't say favorite, but it's like we support people who do what they say they're supposed to do and get it done, and we can continue to work with those folks. Same way we can shake hands and walk away from people who are looking to do more harm than good with the properties.
Thanks, guys. Gina, one more for you. So about your sales for rehab program, do you set the price of those properties, and then would the property need to remain affordable for a certain period of time after the sale?
Only if we subsidize the rehab do we control the next sale price of the property, or who's going to buy it, or how rents are situated. If we have some subsidy into the project, then we definitely set those criteria. But if we're strictly selling it to someone who's going to rehab it, unless they tell us particularly that this is what their intentions are, then we won't seek to control that. As long as we know that a quality rehab is getting done and getting turned over in the market, then we're satisfied with that.
This is a question from me. I know a little bit about this from my former time as a Capital District land banker sort of a guy. Can either of you or both of you speak to how land banks can help municipalities or counties address zombie properties?
I'll let Adam go first.
Sure. So for our definition here in our neck of the woods, or I guess our land bank, zombie properties are bank-owned properties that the bank owns them, and they've foreclosed on the owner, and they tend to sit vacant, and they look and act like other vacant properties deteriorating because banks don't do a great job. Some banks don't do a great job maintaining the asset. and the banks want to recover a certain amount of money that the market won't support or the neighborhood won't support. And so it sits half dead, half alive because they're paying taxes and it won't go to foreclosure. So we've kind of chipped away at those in a couple different ways. If we can work with national groups like NCST, which is an organization that helps banks after settlements have to kind of get their properties into the hands of community-based groups. We'll work on getting an acquisition of those properties and then put them in our inventory and turn them into home ownership opportunities. Sometimes we still have to pay to acquire those, but the price is very fair. Other times we've been working with like the city of Albany because there's quite a number of zombie properties in the city of Albany. As they do what they do as a city, which is put some teeth into enforcement and hold banks more and more responsible. Actually, Albany, Schenectady, and Troy have all gotten together and started to collectively sue banks for being bad actors. Those properties need some place to go. And once the banks are ready to kind of let go of them or do the right thing, in my opinion, land banks could be on the receiving end of those. So those are kind of just two ways off the top where land banks could have a role, whether it's on the acquisition side or when the property is disposed of by the bank where it could go. I will say that our land bank is a little unique. We're tied directly in the tax foreclosure process. So we have many properties that we get through tax foreclosure. So it's somewhat rare for us to go out and acquire more property, but if it's from a bank and it's causing a nuisance and we can work out a deal, then we have and will do it just to stop the harm that property's doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, and very similarly for Chautauqua County too. One thing that we found is as the real estate market got hotter, the bank auctions have gotten more expensive. So we haven't been able to purchase as many bank foreclosures as we used to. And we found that a lot of the donations through the National Stabilization Trust has decreased a fair bit. So zombie properties are really a part of our inventory when we can get access to them at a reasonable price, but a lot of times we're not really seeing that happen as easily in the market as it used to.
It's almost it's a decent problem to have, right? It's like, oh, we have fewer zombies than there. I mean, the New York State zombie law and the way the Attorney General's office went after zombie properties, it's a nation leader, right? That program was ahead of the curve across the country. One other thing I want to talk about, you guys both mentioned partnerships, and that's in Columbia County, we have a real dearth of the kinds of organizations you guys were talking about, right? We do not have a NeighborWorks affiliate throughout the county. I know Albany has one, at least one. You guys might have a few. Gina, I think you've got one or two within your county. And then I think you've got a rural preservation company as well. Can you talk a little bit about how the land bank relates to those kinds of organizations and sort of positive outcomes from working with those kinds of groups?
I guess I'll start. I can't speak to the community land trust, so I'll let Adam do that. But yeah, we have 5 different affordable housing agencies in our county that we work closely with, and we work with them in a variety of ways, whatever works for them. Generally, we're working a lot more with Habitat right now because they've been hungry to do more work in the county. And their access to parcels, if we can provide the parcels to them for a new build where they won't have to purchase it, then that's more money they can put into the development of the house. So we're working with them pretty closely on partnering on new builds. Right now, we have given them rehabs in the past as well. And we'll transfer those to them for $1 again, so that they can really put all their money into the renovation of that home. Our other affordable agencies, it depends on the project that they're working with. One agency tends to do more new builds, so we will look at doing demolitions specifically to assemble parcels for them, and take on the cost of those demos and transfer the properties. so that they can get the parcel assemblage they need for a scattered site new development. And then we have a couple agencies that primarily do renovations for homes, and we can pass through some parcels to them that we feel are decent rehab potential in decent neighborhoods. And then they will take on the cost of that full renovation and put it in the hands of a first-time home buyer.
Yeah, we're very similar approach. I mean, I think we think of the properties as puzzle pieces, and depending on what puzzle you're solving for, whether it's a land trust, affordable housing, open space preservation, sometimes the same piece can fit in different puzzles, but it helps complete that puzzle. And so having the sites we found has a couple benefits. Is we've had nonprofit partners that have come to us to say, I'm trying to do this, but I need some properties, or where are your properties? And we're flexible where we could do it. And we lay it out on the table, and we'll sit around and say, okay, we have this. And they said, oh, well, we never would have been able to do that just trying to catch up and go to the tax auction on the stairs of the courthouse here, right? Like, we needed to sit and think about it. Or we want an option agreement because we're going after state grant to do 10 homes, and we need to show ability to acquire the properties as we put the funding together. And we just need to take a breath and like put together a good, thoughtful project. One example is where we proactively partnered with our land trust. I saw Dan B, forgive me, I don't know your last name, has a question. We have a very well-established land trust here that serves the city of Albany, and they've been around, I think, since the 80s. And one of the things that they've been struggling with, we've learned, is getting real estate to put in the land trust model. They can find the grants to rehab the buildings. They have the buyers waiting on the sidelines, the families that want to live in affordable homes, but they couldn't get to the real estate. They couldn't compete at auction. They didn't have time to put together the money. So we have a formal relationship with our land trust where in neighborhoods where the market is stronger, so not just our historically redlined or disinvested communities, but in neighborhoods that are more affluent or have a stronger housing market and are less affordable in the city of Albany, we actually have a process where the land trust has kind of the first opportunity to purchase that property at a discount, but not for nothing, but at a discount before we market it more broadly, providing they put it in their land trust model and create an affordable housing a long-term permanent affordable housing for that family. So what we've seen is over time, the land trust has been able to access real estate in stronger markets where they were just never able to compete, and build pockets of permanent affordable housing and fully rehabbed homes for families so they can live in a neighborhood that was unattainable for them. And when I say affordable, I mean 80% AMI for where we live is, you know, a family of four making $90,000 a year. It's not low income or very low income. It's our, you know, our state workers, our civil servants and stuff. So it's just a unique model where we kind of put our real estate strengths together and their model and help them kind of do something that they were trying to do, which they couldn't do it before we were here. And that's on our website too, not to point you guys back to our website. It's called Inclusive Neighborhoods. It's a specific program, and it's just unique, and it's actually been replicated in other communities, probably even better than we set ours up. And it's growing. Land trust, land bank partnerships are definitely growing, especially during the affordable housing crisis.
Yeah, Adam's being humble. The Center for Community Progress is an organization that produces a lot of data and a lot of reports on both land banking and community land trusts. And they've been banging the drum about land bank and community land trust partnerships, working within the same region for a really long time. And the program that Adam's talking about was a result of a grant that was awarded to both the land bank and the CLT. I believe they shared that grant. Gina, you mentioned RPA 19A. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that is and the land bank's role in any kind of 19A proceeding?
Sure. So 19A is a part of the real property law that allows municipalities to take control of properties that meet the criteria as vacant and abandoned, and also have to be 1 year delinquent on their taxes. By allowing municipalities to do that, you know, it allows them or us to get into a property before it just declines to the state of needing to be demolished, right? If it's delinquent a year versus delinquent 3 years, you know, then it's getting in the hands of a responsible property owner a lot quicker, can be rehabbed and salvaged and put into programs. And it's just a real effective way for municipalities to kind of take the reins to gain site control over vacant and abandons. Municipalities are the only ones that can take a 19A approach. And I believe it has to be a local municipality. It can't be the county. It's got to be the local jurisdiction that takes the reins on something like that. But what the city of Jamestown has done, and they've been pretty aggressive in doing 19As, is that when they take control of the property, now suddenly they're holding real estate, and they're having to take care of, maintain that real estate and develop a program to dispose of that real estate, all of which the land bank is pretty familiar with doing those types of things. So we're trying to negotiate with them some sort of agreement where we can share services and the land bank can hold and dispose of the properties, seeing as we're both using basically the same criteria for that, putting them into first-time home buyers' hands with some incentives, with some rebates, with some stabilization funds maybe, and then, you know, share any revenue that's made over the sale of that property. Because certainly it takes a lot of legal time to run a program like that. The city of Jamestown was fortunate to get zombie funding when that was around, and that's how they created the legal position in their development department to have somebody that was strictly focused on doing 19As. That legislation has recently been expanded to a 19B, which allows the same procedure to be used by a municipality to cover commercial properties now as well as residential. So I think that's going to be a real game changer, especially in the environment that we have right now post-pandemic.
Great. All right, well, thank you. I don't see any more questions in the chat unless anyone wants to raise their hand. I'd like to thank both. Oh, Michael Tucker has a question or a comment.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Adam. And thank you, Gina. I have a quick round of questions. So if you could just give a yes or no answer or elaborate. But first up, you gave some indication as to where a land bank gets its funding. While it could receive a county appropriation, is it required to receive a county appropriation to function?
Is this like rapid fire? Like
Yes, rapid fire. We're over time, but
no,
these
it's
are
not.
questions.
No, it's not required. No, but
Okay.
it certainly helps. But it's not required. Some land banks get some funding or assistance in other ways, shared services, and many do not.
Will it result in properties going off the tax rolls while in the land bank's name before it's resold and put back on the tax rolls?
Yes. Well, all real property held by land banks is exempt from all taxation in the state of New York. But these are properties that weren't collecting taxes during the several years of foreclosure prior to the transfer. So,
and once it's sold or transferred, can a land bank provide tax exemptions to a developer or ultimate purchaser?
no.
And you already mentioned that a land bank has no ability to interfere with local zoning, planning, or other comprehensive land use regulations.
Correct, although we do work very closely with those individuals in terms of planning and execution.
Same.
Great. Gina, how long has the Chautauqua Land Bank been in existence?
A little over 10 years.
So, and Adam, how long have you been at this?
We were started in 2014, so 9 years now.
9 years.
Yeah.
So I think this certainly has given us a concept of where you can end up in the future and developing and expanding on the depth and capacity of the land bank and its staff. You know, what we're looking at is, getting started and going slow.
Mhm.
And, you certainly have given us a plethora of ideas and opportunities. But from in a very short comment, when you first got started, what were the key focuses of the organizations, and what do you see as where we would get started and where we would focus if we were to set up a land bank?
Gina, you want to go first, or?
Go ahead, Adam.
I just, what I appreciated, I mean, I wasn't here when they started the land bank. I think it was maybe a year in or two, but I essentially helped scale it a little bit. But we benefited from, at that time, having 9 other land banks having blazed the path before us, plus some national partners that helped us with best practices. There are now 28 land banks, so you are walking a well-trodden path should you decide to go down the path of land banks, where we share everything. A lot of our documents are common and required by law, so they're all on the website. But if you have a question or anything, there's a whole network where if someone doesn't know the answer, chances are someone else could point you to it. And I think that new land banks, having talking to them, have greatly benefited from that infrastructure being in place. And Gina, I don't know if you want to have anything, because you also have grown your land bank.
Yeah, I would say, between the association, which is just a huge value to anyone starting a land bank, much less operating one. We're very forthright with each other. We're very collaborative in terms of what we do. And one of the strange but wonderful things about New York State land banks is we all have very different operating priorities and focuses. And so you find one that kind of aligns with what you want to accomplish. And I'm sure they're happy to mentor you along the way.
I will actually jump in on this since I was at the ground level of a land bank. If we had, so I co-created the Troy Community Land Bank and was its director of operations for a few years. If we had the current amount of land banks, previous work and best practices to base our bylaws and our policies and our procedures on, we would have got done a lot more, a lot quicker. The first really 6 months to 10 months is just capacity building and kind of getting your feet under you. But by that point, you should be champing at the bit to start getting your hands on some property.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add to Mike's point is land banks can come in every shape and size. They're tailored to your community's needs and how you want to establish it. But you don't have to do as much startup work as you did 5-10 years ago. You can really hit the ground running and just do a couple projects and start off. And you won't be doing it for the first time in the state, because there's plenty of folks that will share the good and the bad of what works and what doesn't, and what we can short circuit some of the learning curve. And that's why New York's program continues to get stronger, is because we kind of work together so closely.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, I think that will do it. Adam, and Gina, I took care of your links are in the chat. So if anybody wants to go to those websites, I do apologize that the New York Land Bank Association reroutes you to the report from the Greater Syracuse Land Bank's website and not Albany's. But the Greater Syracuse Land Bank is one of the early leaders in New York State land banking. That's a website that's well worth taking a look at if you're interested in the history of New York State land banks.
For sure.
Thank you, folks. This was very helpful.
My pleasure. Thanks,
Happy to be
everyone.
here.
Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
And if anyone has any questions about how we're doing, feel free to email me. Everyone on this call has my email address.
Yep.
Thank
Take
you so
care,
much.
everyone. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.